this series that has just generated so much interest with people. Not only has Kevin deconstructed the horrors of the Catholic Church and the Vatican, last week we went over to the Mormon Church. And, a lot of people have been asking questions about the Vatican's ninth circle, secret society, cult, call it whatever you want, the horrors that performed. So this week, Kevin is going to keep us up to date on all of his latest news. And we're also going to take a deep dive into the Vatican's ninth circle. And please don't forget, all of Kevin's links are in the description box. Please support his important work. He's risking his life talking about these things. He's had attempts on his life. He's told us about these things over the years. And we really appreciate that. And you're supporting him by buying his books as well. So all the links are down there. But perhaps we should start with what's your latest news, Kevin?
Well, the big news this week. Hi again, Shaun and everyone. It's great to be back as always. We talked several shows ago about the convening of this International Common Law Court based on the new evidence about so-called Pope Leo, his ties with the Ninth Circle when he was ordained a priest in 1978. And after that, the court judges actually met for the first time last Monday. And I was on a Zoom call with them and the public prosecutor they've appointed. Now, these are European folks. They were involved in our previous court case, and they're veterans of all of this. And not only this issue, but the whole attempt to bring justice outside the existing court system, which is totally compromised on these things. So we met, and one of the first things we did is the prosecutor has actually interviewed two of the eyewitnesses I spoke about earlier, the German woman who saw Robert Prevost, the present Pope Leo, at two ceremonies of the Ninth Circle, where she claimed he sexually assaulted her, spread blood on her from the baby they had just sacrificed, that kind of thing. And the Ninth Circle member who had come forward, an old man in his 80s, who has taken advantage of the amnesty offered by the court. This is blanket amnesty for anyone who provides evidence. So we're on the basis of that, we're realizing we have to expand our the purpose of this court. It isn't simply to bring another case. We realize that the reason these crimes carry on, Shaun, is because there's a whole political, religious, financial infrastructure that supports them. The existing governments, the courts, the churches, the banks. And so we need to create, as we've done before, our own separate jurisdiction outside all of that in order to take action. One of the things, for example, deputizing police to go in and stop these ceremonies, to make the arrests, to shut it down, in other words. So we don't want to dabble around. We want to go and just stop this whole system. And so it's a big effort and requires everybody's help in that. So that's kind of a background to what I want to talk about today. That picture you flashed on the screen, that was actually one of our old witnesses, Toos Nijenhuis. And she was raised in the Ninth Circle. She's a Dutch woman. I met her a number of times in Holland. She's standing at the site where she was taken as a child. This is in a forest south of Brussels. She said she was taken there. The Belgian army had surrounded it and protected the ritual going on there. And she claimed that Queen Beatrix of Holland had provided teenagers from youth detention centers who were part of the human hunting party that took place there. The spot she's standing is where the children were brought and burned alive. Some of them, others eviscerated and killed and eaten, like in the Ninth Circle ceremonies. And so that was the spot. That picture, I think, is from about 2013. But it's, example of one of the witnesses. That's Toos in one of our interviews. Her testimony is actually up online. You can see it on YouTube, amazingly enough. But this is an example of what we're looking at. Now, let me go into some of the new evidence that the prosecutor has kind of vetted and allowed to be released. We can't name specific places or individuals' names at this point, but one of the pictures I did put up there is a place we can mention. It's called the Schloss Hollinghofen. It's a castle near Arnsberg, Germany. And it's where the German eyewitness, this woman, nope, that's the Vancouver Club. We'll get to that. That's in Canada. That's another Ninth Circle site. That's we've got.
Oh, I think I found it.
That's it. The Schloss Hollenhofen. Now, our German eyewitness said she was taken there as a young child many times because she was born and raised in the cult. And you see, they kill the eldest child of the family, sponsoring family, and then they use other children. They call them the goats that lead the sheep to the sacrifice. And it's interesting they use those terms, goats and sheep. It's not only out of the Bible, but MK Ultra experiments in America and other places used exactly that same expression. That sheep are the people they use in the experiments, and the goat are the family members who lure them in and compromise them to be so that they can use. So that's what we mean by this infrastructure around it. It isn't just a bunch of loonies. They've got a whole system in place to protect them, legally, politically, and every way, religiously. And so anyway, at this Schloss Hollenhof, this guy called Cardinal Franz Hengsbach, and I sent you his picture. He conducted the ceremony where she saw a little boy, 4 years old, first assaulted and horribly tortured and then killed by this man. And at the same thing, the same ceremony, they brought in a baby who was barely 1 year old and did the same thing to the baby, if you can imagine that. You know, penetrating a baby, and it's like beyond belief, but this is part of the ritual. The higher you go up in the Ninth Circle cult, the more grisly the experiment, the ritual is, and the more they test people. So if you're in the higher echelons, kind of like a 33rd degree Mason, if you're in the higher echelons in the Ninth Circle, like this guy, you're all standing there naked, covered in the blood of your victim. They go into the ceremony, and if you're not willing to rape and torture and violate these little newborn babies, you're instantly killed yourself. Your throat is cut and your blood is used. And our German eyewitness described that happening, including at the ceremony in 1978, where the present Pope was inducted into the Ninth Circle cult with John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła. And so this individual is one of the, unfortunately, he died in 1991, this cardinal. But before they die, they have this ritual whereby they believe their soul can be passed on to the next person in line in the Ninth Circle cult. And they did this ceremony, and we can't release the name of the person he passed it on to, but it's another high Roman cleric, also from Germany. And so another thing this witness said is there was a doctor working closely with the church nearby, and he had beneath his house, there was a basement area, and it was kind of like a gymnasium, but when you go in there, there's a secret door, and in the wall, an extended wall, was a whole area where they kept the children in cages. And also they did these things, they're like bloodletting ceremonies, but also they had all these nuns taking blood from children before they were killed. And you know, they talk about blood samples, DNA samples all the time in developing ethnically targeted bioweapons, things like that. You know, the military's done that all over the world. And so this is what I mean about it has a military application too. They were experimenting on these children, not just using them in these arcane ceremonies. So that's some of what the prosecutor has come up already in just less than 1 week. And we've had indications that there are more people, including in Interpol, and like I mentioned before, the Italian government, who have their own files on the Ninth Circle, but they've been ready or kind of waiting for the right environment in which to release these things.
So let's go over this Ninth Circle a bit more slowly then, Kevin.
Yeah.
When was it first introduced, the Ninth Circle?
Vatican records describe it being formed in the time of the Jesuits in the 1500s. And the Jesuits using it as a political device to control popes, cardinals, and kings and politicians all over Europe. And so don't forget, you know, the Jesuits were formed to kill Queen Elizabeth I. That was their first kind of act. She was the only Protestant monarch opposing Rome. And the Spanish, you know, about the Spanish Armada trying to invade England, that Jesuits were formed right at that time as a secret army. And this is one of the weapons of the secret army, right? They also based it on very old Roman rituals, which we've talked about. And that's, that energy center in Rome, and the Jesuit headquarters right down the road from St. Peter's Square. It's literally on the same street, the San Lorenzo Church. That was where the first Ninth Circle ceremonies were actually held. And that's from Vatican records. Also, other references over the centuries, eyewitnesses describing that. And it's sprouted all over the world now. It goes by different names. Like, as I'll talk about in a while, that picture of the Vancouver Club. In Canada, it's called the 12-Mile Club. And that's because they operate, when we shone a light on the Vancouver Club back in the 90s, they moved their practices offshore onto yachts, and then they go outside the 12-mile territorial limit, dump the bodies. Yeah, that's the spot. Now, I've actually, recently, we've been talking to city workers in Vancouver, because this building, right downtown Vancouver on the waterfront, it's perched above the vast kind of tunnel network that exists under Vancouver. Dating from about the 1880s, when the city was first founded, the early bootleggers used these tunnels to bring in the booze. But then later, the government and the churches and that took it over, because all of the major churches run right along that axis, along what's called Burrard Street. It's like an energy line. And all these, churches began to protest that. No wonder the police began to get very paranoid and started making arrests when this happened, when other people began protesting, because it's right at the center of kind of demonic activity in Vancouver. Now, we have interviewed people who came out there of that at early on a Saturday morning, children who were taken in Friday night, limousines that go to the Squamish Indian Reservation right across the sound from this building, and brought in. I mean, all of that is in murderbydecree.com. We had that aspect thoroughly documented. But recently, these city workers have agreed to take our investigators down into the tunnels right under that Vancouver Club. One of these guys whose testimony I heard was too scared to talk about what they had found down there. But, based on past experiences in these tunnels, it'll be undoubtedly linked to these sacrificial rituals and the kind of thing that the other witnesses have described in Europe.
So you said then that they lifted the term from Dante's Inferno, and just to expand on that, it says here, the ninth circle of hell, the deepest and most horrifying, is a frozen wasteland reserved for traitors. The circle is divided into 4 subcircles, each with a specific type of betrayal. Those who dwell here are frozen in a lake of ice, with the depth of their immersion determining the severity of their punishment. So whose idea was it then? Do you know who originated with?
Well, Dante Alighieri, the Italian poet who wrote that in the 14th century, it was interesting. He was actually a confidant of various popes. He was an insider in the Vatican, so he knew what he was talking about. And ironically, in some of the censored writing, which is, he wrote it as a poem in order to conceal as well. So he wasn't killed, but he's referring to Vatican practices, and the most heinous sin is to betray the trust of a child, to betray innocence, either within ourselves or in the world. That's what Satan likes the best. It's in terms of grabbing souls. If you like, the essence of a human being is their innocence, their godlike relation with children and each other. And if you betray that and sacrifice that, you get ultimate satanic power. That's the belief. So it comes from that, but it's even deeper, because it has to do with things that people have alluded to, but there hasn't been a lot of hard evidence on, but having to do with energy captivation, definitely subterranean portals that open up, and energetic portals. One of the Ninth Circle practices in Arizona is near, the Vatican Observatory they have there.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So it's built right on the land where the Anasazi, or the Apache native people, say in their oral traditions, the sky opened many centuries ago, long before the whites came. The sky opened and dragon people came through to subvert and destroy humanity. And that's where they build the Vatican Observatory, and it's one of the areas in America where more children go missing than anywhere else, and a lot of them disappear off the Indian reservations. And we've had social workers who've talked to us. We've had cops who go in there to try to find out about it, and they got shut down by the FBI like that. I mean, it's instant arrest, smear campaign, the usual thing they do, incarceration, all that. So, I mean, that's another piece of it, right? But it shows you how global this thing is.
Let me just add a bit more to that then. So the ninth circle is dedicated to those who betrayed trust, whether to their families, their countries, or their benefactors. The circle is further divided into 4 rings based on the type of betrayal committed. The first one is Caina, named after the biblical Cain. This ring is for those who betrayed family members. Next one is Antenora, named after Antenor of Troy. This ring is for those who betrayed their political or national allegiances. And then Ptolomea. This ring is for those who betrayed their hosts or guests, often by killing them after receiving their hospitality. And then we've got Judecca, the innermost ring where Satan himself is located, is for those who betrayed their benefactors or masters, including Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius. Those in the ninth circle are frozen in a lake of ice, with the depth of their immersion reflecting the severity of their betrayal. The worst sinners, those in Judecca, are entirely encased in the ice. Satan, the embodiment of evil, resides in the center of the ninth circle, where he eternally chews on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. Dante, as he descends into the ninth circle, expresses fear and even remains silent in Satan's presence, a marked departure from his usual curiosity and questioning. Wow.
Now, what's interesting about that is you see there's different agendas at all times kind of mixed up. Like in the Bible, you've got multiple books and messages stuck together into one book. Now, here, for example, they say the worst traitors are Brutus and Cassius. Well, they were actually, in the light of history, they were actually the good guys. They were trying to get rid of Caesar, who was trying to have absolute authority, like a pope does, right? So the Vatican agenda is in there to say, don't overthrow a monarch. That's a bad thing, right? And they're going to go to hell. So there's kind of the church message in there, but it's designed to obfuscate and confuse the other message, which is that you notice in that the official account, there's no mention of children. There's no mention of our betrayal of our own soul, like you see. And so you got to pick out the particle of truth and a lot of the fogging that goes around and the institutional kind of message that's in there, which is slaves never disobey your master, never challenge authority, never challenge, a king or a pope or whatever. That's what's in the official kind of Dante or the Inferno thing, designed to instill fear in the masses of people and have them keep going to church, right? So you got to separate that from kind of the thread that runs through this, which is that by naming it the ninth circle, they're saying we are harnessing the forces of Satan. And that's why, like I mentioned before, the present Pope, when he took his vow as a priest in October 1978, he also took the vow to the ninth circle at the same time to serve both. And, that's part of this whole thing.
So what year approximately did they incorporate this into the church?
Somewhere, I believe it was before the time of the Jesuits. I believe it was in the High Middle Ages, so I would say like 12th, 13th century at least. Although, because it's based on Roman practices, the practice of it is much older. It's thousands of years old. It just has that particular spin on it since the Middle Ages. Because don't forget, that's when there began to be opposition developing within the church about papal practices, and it's what led to the Reformation. Another link to me is my ancestors in Italy, their last name was Arnati, Arnati. And we, around the 13th century, when that book was written, we had to flee into France because we were what were called Waldensians. And the Waldensians were the early Protestants. They said, we don't need the Pope, we don't need practices, we're just going to leave like the Bible tells us to. And they got horribly persecuted and burned out of Italy, just like we were later in France, right? Kind of always on the move. But you know, so I mean, it's an old, it's a response to dissonance within the church, who start challenging it, like so many people are doing now, challenging this false religion. Right?
So if you were to list the purposes of the ninth circle in the church, what would that list look like?
It's mushroomed from an original arcane practice of, you know, like I say, political control. It's a huge financial operation now. It's tied in with the military, whereby we know that the military has used these ceremonies for experimental purposes. You know, the big thrust of, as we know, a lot of the MKUltra and other experiments for many decades has been, how do you control the human mind so that people can continue to function but have no critical reasoning left? Don't have the ability to say, they've lost the ability to resist, say no, or act on their convictions. You know, they meddle with the pain threshold in the human mind and all that to find out the limits of these things. The Nazis began that. They came over to America under Project Paperclip, continued it. So it's a multi-headed thing now, and that's why the politicians, you know, the legal system, they back right away from this whole thing because they're part of it. They feed it themselves and they're fed by it. So, you know, we're dealing with a real beast here. It isn't just some weirdos in red robes, right?
And why are the rituals so extreme? Is it to see how far they can get the individual members to go? Is it to compromise people?
All of that. It's Anne-Marie von Bienberg, one of our witnesses, was a lawyer who was invited to a chateau for a banquet. And she shows up and everyone's walking to another room and a lot of them leave and she's left standing there with a kid on an altar, right? And at that point, the door's shut. They film the whole thing. She's compromised, right? They do that consistently. One of the guys they did it with, who's still in power, Mark Rutte, R-U-T-T-E, former premier or prime minister of Holland. Now, he has one of the top spots in NATO. They've elevated him, which you tend to, the more you do this stuff, the higher up you go in the system. You know, I mean, NATO, right? And so, yeah, it's designed to compromise, but you're right, to test, like with anything, you know, you see how far people are willing to go. If you're willing to go the distance and have no morality, you go to the top, right? And so it's that too, but it's also part of it's an addiction. They're addicted to stuff. And when you're into an addiction, you have to do it more and more and more and more until it just sucks you dry and there's nothing left. There's no human being left. There's no soul left. And I believe that's what happens. That's why when you're at these high levels, they wear a mask. Like you see a picture of the popes and they're always smiling and beneficent, but those are doctored photos because people who've met them in person all say the same thing. They have these black, dead eyes like, you know, a shark. I don't know if you've ever seen a shark's eye, but it's just a predator, nothing there but deadliness. And that's what you become when you're part of this, right? Yeah, he could qualify for sure.
He looks really dangerous, Kevin.
Well, yeah, when you read more of these testimonies, you'll see what a monster the guy is, and it was. But his successor, you know, is doing exactly the same stuff as we speak, and that's why we're determined to shut down these things and not simply, you know, research and expose it. Right.
All right, folks. So we've got almost 2,000 people watching live across all platforms. Kevin is risking his life talking about these things. So it's very important if we can support his work. All of his links are in the description box. You can get his books, etc. And we're discussing the ninth circle. And Kevin has talked about the origins of it so far and also the purpose of it over the years. And you did touch on something there, you know, about these characters, how they get addicted to the torture and the torment. So would you say you could add to that list of its functions then is the personal gratification these people get from doing these horrific things to people?
Absolutely. That, you know, and having even years ago in my salad days when I was a minister, I did prison ministry, and I've talked to serial killers and serial, you know, bad people And they get a high off it. They're honest and said, yeah, well, this is just what we do to get our high. And it's like a drug that you need more and more of. And so yeah, there's that whole, it's like anything these wealthy people do. It's always, and you know, it isn't just the church. These things happen in all sorts of communities. I remember when I first started my work in Vancouver, there was a fairly famous media commentator. His name was Jack Webster. He was known all over BC, like in the mainstream media. And when I started investigating this stuff, he called me down and we went out to dinner together, and he said, I've known about the Vancouver Club and what those people do there for many, many years. Everybody knows. It's totally protected. You'll never uncover it. You'll never get these guys before justice, even into a court. He said they pass children around like a good bottle of wine. That's how they view it. They have no conscience. And it isn't just them. It's all their rich friends. They all do it. And you get anywhere close to that and you're dead. You know, and he listed a bunch of reporters and cops who had tried to, right? And so he said, I wish you luck, son. That was kind of his, he died the next year, but I mean, that's right from somebody right in the system, right? He was a confidant of all those guys. And, you know, so I mean, that's how it operates, right?
So you mentioned people being compromised outside of the Vatican then. And if you look at the leaders of Europe right now, it's an absolute freak show, from Keir Starmer here to Macron, etc. So are you saying then that even though this ritual is in-house at the Vatican, outsiders are brought into it, perhaps at the head of politics and in power positions? Is that how it works?
Well, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Tos, whose picture you saw there, Tos Nienhuis, said one of the first places she was taken as a child was Carnarvon Castle in Wales, where Philip and Charles were present and at these ceremonies. And, you know, an example of the political power of this, when Tos and me and other people in Europe took this to the European Parliament, there was a member of the European Parliament who took this on. He lasted, and he lasted about a month, and then they threw him out, even though he had parliamentary immunity. He went to jail for 6 months. They went after his house and his family, just for raising the fact it was in relation to that Marc Dutroux case. If you remember Marc Dutroux in Belgium, who was caught with like literal body parts in his house. And in the original court statement he made, the police statement that was then edited out, he made reference to the Dutch royal family members who were with him. And that got edited out and everything. So Laura